Here we go. Brilliant. So thank you for taking this time. I'm really interested to know how you guys do stakeholder mapping in your part of the world. So I hope we can have a good conversation about this later on. One of the things we've been doing recently is just really putting our heads around trying to understand how stakeholder mapping can be made more valuable and really influence the entire engagement process, not being something that's just done at the start of the project or the work, as Philippe mentioned before, and then just forgotten about. So the topics I plan to cover in this presentation today would be just really taking a little step back and saying, well, what is best practice stakeholder management? What is stakeholder mapping? Looking at some of the models that have dominated the practice of stakeholder mapping to date, and just thinking about sort of what are some of the challenges with those models for stakeholder mapping. Then I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the approach we've been taking recently and get some of your feedback on that, and then the discussion on where do we go from there. So when we look at stakeholder engagement, just taking a step back, we all know this, but it's worth kind of putting it in context. So when we think about stakeholders being the individuals, groups, or organisations that can affect or are affected by an organisation's operations and objectives, then that gives us a very broad term for stakeholders. And when we look at the engagement, it's what is stakeholder engagement? It's generally the wide range of tools and practices we use for gaining that consent, control, cooperation, accountability, involvement, participation, building trust, all of that. There's lots of different terms for it, and one of the things we notice in working with people right across the world is that different countries and regions have a different term for it. So in Australia, we tend to centre around stakeholder engagement and community engagement. In the UK, consultation seems to be the primary term that is used. In North America, it tends to be public participation. So, there's various terms for it, but generally, I think they mostly are all a branch of stakeholder engagement. I tend to think of stakeholder engagement as that broader term, all-encompassing of both, community, public, stakeholders, employees, the really broad definition of a stakeholder. So when we look at what our purpose is with stakeholder management, so the stakeholder management is if you like, the mechanics of managing the engagement process. So why do we do it, and what are we hoping to achieve by doing the stakeholder management? And obviously stakeholder mapping is a key part of that. At its heart, a key objective for most organisations is to manage their social licence to operate. There's often regulatory requirements. They need to provide evidence of engagement, and so there's some, depending on the industry you work in, it can be quite heavily regulated in relation to stakeholder engagement.